Sometimes, the smallest moments can alter the course of an entire life. Marcus Taylor, a low-profile philanthropist and entrepreneur, walks into a bank one afternoon, unaware that a simple misjudgment would set off a series of events that would challenge his beliefs, the bank's practices, and one person's ability to learn from their mistakes. This is a story of prejudice, reflection, and the power of change. It was a typical sunny day when I, Marcus Taylor, stepped into the sleek glass doors of a downtown bank, eager to start a new chapter. The city's financial district glittered in the midday sun, but I wasn't interested in the towering skyscrapers or the hustle around me. I'd always kept a low profile, focused on my work, my foundation, and the communities I supported. Despite my wealth, I found little joy in the glitz of the media or the flashy displays of success. I'd learned long ago that true fulfillment came from investing in the people around me, in projects that could make a real impact. That morning, I was there to open a special account for my foundation, a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged communities with education, healthcare, and job development. But what I didn't anticipate was how this seemingly routine interaction would lead to a moment of personal and professional reckoning. Vanessa Thompson, a respected banker at the branch, was on a phone call when I entered. She didn't notice me immediately, too wrapped up in a conversation with a demanding client. I stood there quietly, patiently waiting for her attention. When she finally glanced up, her eyes swept over me quickly, disinterested. I didn't fit the usual profile of the big spender she'd grown accustomed to seeing. My suit, although tailored and professional, didn't bear the obvious designer label that some of her high-profile clients flaunted. In that moment, it was clear. I wasn't what she expected. Her tone, when she finally turned her attention to me, was polite but distant. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" "I'd like to open an account for my foundation," I replied calmly. "It's to manage donations and support various community initiatives. I'm looking for something flexible, with more personalized services." She didn't seem to recognize the name Marcus Taylor, nor the importance of what I was saying. She assumed I was overinflating my needs. "We have several options for personal accounts," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'd recommend one of our standard accounts. It covers all basic services." I could feel the subtle judgment in her words. Vanessa's dismissive attitude didn't go unnoticed, but I kept my composure. "I appreciate the suggestion, but my foundation handles substantial funds, and we'd need something more tailored. I'd need advice on more specialized products." Vanessa's response was swift and uninterested. "For those specific needs, you might want to speak with a firm that specializes in those services. We cater to a very specific clientele here." Her words stung, though I didn't let it show. I thanked her and walked out without raising my voice. I wasn't angry, but I couldn't ignore the underlying truth of the situation. The prejudice I'd faced was real, even in places where one would least expect it. As I walked out of the bank, I thought about what had just happened. This wasn't the first time I'd been judged based on my appearance. It seemed like some people could never see past the surface. But instead of letting it affect me negatively, I decided to use it as an opportunity for self-reflection. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. Meanwhile, Vanessa, unaware of the gravity of her mistake, returned to her work. To her, I was just another client who didn't quite fit her usual expectations. But little did she know, her actions that day were going to affect her in ways she could never have imagined. The next day, as I sat in my modest apartment reflecting on the events, I realized something was missing in my usual approach to life. I had spent years giving back to the community, focusing on helping others rise up, yet I had never truly faced this kind of judgment head-on. This incident wasn't just a matter of being misunderstood. It was an opportunity to use my position to create real change, both for myself and for others who felt the sting of prejudice. As I sat there, letting the sun filter through my window, I made a decision. I was going to find a way to turn this experience into a lesson, something more than just a story to tell. I wasn't going to let this pass quietly. I was going to act. Meanwhile, at the bank, Vanessa's world was about to shift, though she had no idea yet. The following day, Vanessa returned to work, none the wiser about the consequences her actions would soon bring. She was still convinced she had acted professionally, dealing with a client who didn't quite fit the mold. But that all changed when a colleague casually mentioned the name Marcus Taylor. "Did you know Marcus Taylor was here yesterday?" he asked, voice tinged with surprise. Vanessa, who hadn't paid much attention to me, asked blankly, "Who?" Her colleague raised an eyebrow. "Marcus Taylor? The philanthropist? The billionaire? He's been all over the news lately, especially for his charitable work. Did you not recognize him?" Suddenly, Vanessa's face went pale. Her heart sank as the weight of her mistake hit her like a wave. The man she'd so carelessly dismissed was no ordinary client. He was a well-known figure, not just wealthy, but a leader in philanthropy and community development. She had misjudged him entirely based on his appearance. Panic started to rise in her chest. What had she done? She had not only insulted a prominent figure, but worse, she had made a poor judgment about him because of her own biases. The realization of how badly she had miscalculated her professional conduct hit her hard, and the consequences began to unfold in her mind. In the following hours, Vanessa could barely focus on her tasks. The shame and guilt started to gnaw at her, and by lunchtime, she retreated to her office to research Marcus Taylor. The results were immediate and clear. Marcus was not just a successful businessman. He was a respected leader known for his significant contributions to education, healthcare, and social causes. Vanessa was devastated. Her knee-jerk reaction, based purely on assumptions, had cost her the respect of someone who could have been a key figure in the bank's future. As she scrolled through the articles about Marcus, she couldn't help but feel small. How could she have been so blind? She knew a simple apology wouldn't suffice. She had to do more. She had to understand why she acted the way she did. And more importantly, she had to change. While Vanessa wrestled with her own internal crisis, I was doing the same, but from a different angle. I had faced judgment like this before. But this time, something felt different. The usual response was to brush it off and move on. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a sign. This wasn't just a matter of a misjudgment. It was a moment of opportunity. Not just for me, but for anyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or judged based on superficial assumptions. So, I started reaching out to friends and colleagues, seeking advice. How should I handle this? One friend suggested something that resonated deeply with me. Use your platform. You've got a voice, Marcus. Make it count. Turn this into a chance for education, not just retribution. I thought about it long and hard. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted change. I wanted Vanessa and the bank to understand that what happened wasn't just a simple mistake. It was indicative of a much larger issue. So I made the decision to confront this head-on. Not with anger, but with a message. A message that would challenge the status quo and hopefully create an opportunity for others to learn. The next day, I received a call that I wasn't expecting. Richard Lawson, the CEO of the bank, reached out to personally apologize for the incident. "Mr. Taylor," he began in a tone of sincere professionalism, "I want to extend my deepest apologies for what happened at our branch. The treatment you received does not reflect the values we stand for at FinCorp Bank. I'd like to invite you to a meeting to discuss how we can make things right." At first, I was taken aback. It was rare to get a call from someone at that level, let alone an apology so direct and personal. But I appreciated it. It was a step in the right direction. Still, I knew the conversation wasn't going to be just about apologies. This had to go beyond that. It was about real, lasting change. I agreed to meet with him and the senior management team, but I was clear that I wanted to use this moment for something more than just reconciliation. I wanted to ensure that this event became the catalyst for transformation, not just for the bank, but for every individual within it who could learn from this mistake. The day of the meeting arrived. The air in FinCorp's high-rise conference room was thick with tension. The top brass of the bank had gathered, including Richard Lawson, the head of public relations, and other senior executives. Vanessa, who had been on leave, was also in attendance. I had no intention of making this meeting hostile. My goal was to foster understanding and growth. Richard opened the discussion by addressing me directly. Marcus, once again, we apologize for the incident. What happened at our branch does not represent who we are as an organization. We're committed to implementing change, and we're here to listen, to learn, and to ensure something like this never happens again. I nodded, acknowledging his words. But I wasn't here to simply hear apologies. I wanted to see action, and I made that clear. I appreciate your apology, Richard. But words are not enough. I've spent my life fighting for change, for equity, and for justice. I want to know what concrete steps FinCorp is willing to take to ensure this never happens again, not just to me, but to anyone else who walks through those doors. Vanessa, visibly nervous, spoke up. Mr. Taylor, I want to personally apologize for my behavior. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I deeply regret that. I understand now that my actions were wrong, and I'm committed to doing the work to change. Her voice shook, but there was genuine remorse in it. I appreciated her apology, but I wasn't interested in dwelling on the past. This moment was about the future. I appreciate your honesty, Vanessa, I said calmly. But this is bigger than one interaction. It's about the culture that allowed this kind of judgment to happen in the first place. What will FinCorp do to address this internally? How will you ensure that all employees, from the top down, are educated on these issues? Richard turned to his team. We've already begun drafting a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program, which will be mandatory for all employees. This will include unconscious bias training, customer service workshops, and a review of our hiring practices to ensure they are truly inclusive. He paused, looking me in the eye. We're also exploring ways to foster an open dialogue within the bank about these issues, so that employees feel empowered to share their experiences and concerns. I nodded slowly, impressed by the initiative, but also cautious. This was a good start, but it couldn't just be a one-time effort. It had to be embedded in the culture with tangible accountability. And how will you measure success? I asked. We'll track employee satisfaction, customer feedback, and ensure that diversity is represented at all levels of the organization, Richard responded. We're also considering establishing an external advisory board to guide us through this process. As the meeting went on, I could sense that the senior leadership of FinCorp was genuinely committed to making real changes. They weren't just giving me empty promises. They were discussing concrete steps they would take to reshape their culture. It was encouraging, but I still had a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Would it be enough? After the meeting, the news spread quickly. The media caught wind of the apology and the commitment to change, and the story made its way across multiple platforms. The questions that followed weren't just about what had happened between me and Vanessa. They were about the larger issue of discrimination in corporate environments, especially in industries as prominent as finance. Some journalists lauded FinCorp's efforts, applauding their willingness to confront their mistakes and work toward a more inclusive future. But others, more skeptical, questioned whether it was all just a well-timed PR move to avoid bad press. I wasn't sure which way it would go, but I knew one thing. This had to go beyond the headlines. If this was going to matter, it had to leave a lasting impact. Meanwhile, Vanessa was quietly processing everything that had happened. She took her leave seriously, spending her time reflecting on her actions and beginning to immerse herself in the learning materials the bank had provided. The guilt was overwhelming at times, but she was determined to change, not just for the sake of her career, but for herself. She recognized that her biases weren't just isolated to that single moment with me. They had been a part of her for far longer, unnoticed and unchecked. The pressure was mounting on her, but she knew that it was part of the process. This wasn't about excusing her behavior. It was about confronting it and working towards becoming a better person, a better professional. She reached out to diversity experts, attending workshops on unconscious bias, microaggressions, and how to cultivate a genuinely inclusive mindset. One night, after a particularly difficult seminar, she sat down at her kitchen table, exhausted but resolved. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to me. "Mr. Taylor, I've had some time to reflect, and I want to extend my deepest apologies once more. I've been doing the work to understand my actions and how they affected you and others. It's been a humbling experience, and I am committed to being a part of this change, not just within the bank, but within myself." When I read her message, I could hear the sincerity in her words. She had recognized the depth of her mistake, and she wasn't hiding from it. It wasn't about saving face anymore. It was about true growth. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. This entire experience, painful as it was, had brought us both to a point of introspection and transformation. I wasn't just changing her perspective. She was changing mine too. I decided to meet with her again, not as an adversary, but as someone who had learned the value of second chances. When we sat down in a quiet cafe, there was a palpable tension between us, but it wasn't the same as before. There was no judgment, no preconceptions, just two people willing to listen, learn, and move forward. "I appreciate your message, Vanessa," I began, "but more than anything, I appreciate that you're taking the steps to learn and grow from this. It's not easy, and I know it's not a quick fix, but it's worth it. I've been in situations where I had to change too, where I had to face the uncomfortable truth about myself." She nodded, her expression serious. "I'm not proud of how I treated you, Marcus, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making it right. I'm learning how to be better, not just as a banker, but as a person." There was a quiet moment between us, a rare silence that spoke volumes. Neither of us had all the answers, but we were both on a path to something better. Over the next few weeks, the shifts in both FinCorp Bank and Vanessa's personal growth became increasingly evident. The bank had launched a series of workshops on unconscious bias, diversity, and inclusion, and employees from all levels were taking part. The conversations were uncomfortable at times, but they were necessary. For the first time, the institution was grappling with its own culture of exclusion and beginning to understand how deep those biases ran. The new initiatives, which included mentorship programs for underrepresented groups and a more inclusive recruitment strategy, were beginning to show promise. Though there were still skeptics within the company, employees who thought it was all just a corporate obligation or a temporary fix, there were also those who saw the potential for real change. The atmosphere within the office began to shift. Slowly, it became clear that this wasn't just about compliance with diversity quotas. It was about fostering a genuinely inclusive culture. Meanwhile, I was busy with my foundation, with community outreach, and with trying to turn this painful experience into something meaningful. I had long ago made the decision to use my influence for good, not just for my own gain, but to give a voice to those who had been marginalized and overlooked. I partnered with several community leaders and organizations to create a new initiative aimed at providing mentorship and scholarships to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. These students, often overlooked by the traditional business world, would now have access to networks and resources that could help them succeed. The foundation's impact was growing, and it was gratifying to see how quickly the program gained traction. The media coverage around the incident with FinCorp Bank began to shift too. What started as a story about an isolated incident of bias had now become a broader discussion on diversity and inclusion in the corporate world. People started looking to FinCorp, and to me, as examples of what could happen when individuals were willing to confront their prejudices and take action. I continued to speak out publicly, using my platform to educate and advocate for real systemic change. It wasn't just about fighting for the right cause, it was about setting an example, showing that even when faced with personal affronts, we can choose to rise above, reflect, and make a positive difference in the world around us. A few months later, FinCorp hosted their first annual conference on diversity and inclusion, which I was invited to attend. The event was a turning point. It was no longer just an apology, it was an action plan in motion, and the world was watching. Vanessa, now a more integral part of the bank's new diversity initiatives, was at the forefront of the event. She was no longer the same person who had once misjudged me. She had transformed. Gone was the woman who had dismissed me based on my appearance. In her place was someone willing to speak openly about her journey, her mistakes, and her commitment to change. At the conference, I participated in a panel discussion about leadership in creating inclusive cultures. Vanessa joined me, along with other leaders in the field, and we talked candidly about our experiences. Vanessa shared her personal story, how the incident had shaken her, but ultimately led her to a profound realization about her own biases. The most difficult thing for me, she said to the audience, was admitting that I was part of the problem. But once I acknowledged that, I could finally start the work of fixing it. This is not something that happens overnight. It takes constant learning, humility, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. Her words resonated deeply with the audience. She wasn't speaking as a banker anymore. She was speaking as someone who had been through a painful but transformative process of self-discovery. As she finished her speech, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. Vanessa, once a symbol of ignorance, had become an advocate for real change. FinCorp Bank, which had once been a place that embodied the very biases I had fought against, was now a leader in diversity efforts. I took the stage after her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I've been fortunate enough to see the power of second chances, I said. But more importantly, I've seen the power of transformation, not just in myself, but in others. The actions of one person or one organization can have a ripple effect, and it's up to us to make sure those ripples lead to something better. The success of the conference marked a pivotal moment in the ongoing transformation at FinCorp Bank, but more importantly, it marked a moment of change in the hearts of many who had attended. It wasn't just a corporate event, it was a living, breathing example of what can happen when people are willing to acknowledge their flaws and take action to rectify them. For Vanessa, the impact of that day wasn't just about the recognition or the success of the event. It was the personal growth she had undergone. She had transformed from someone who saw herself as simply a professional doing her job to someone actively working to dismantle the biases she had carried for so long. But her journey wasn't over. As the bank's diversity initiatives gained traction, Vanessa found herself in new roles and responsibilities, taking on leadership positions that would allow her to continue promoting inclusivity in every corner of the institution. Meanwhile, I stayed focused on my mission. My foundation's work was flourishing, and it felt like the ripple effects of the incident with FinCorp were expanding far beyond anything I could have imagined. What had started as a painful moment of judgment and misunderstanding had snowballed into something much larger, a nationwide conversation on diversity, inclusion, and systemic change. I began speaking at universities, community centers, and corporate conferences, sharing the lessons I had learned and urging others to recognize their own biases and act on them. I couldn't help but feel proud of the path we were on. FinCorp, the institution where I had once been dismissed so quickly, was now a leading example of how to handle corporate responsibility with sincerity. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A real start. As time passed, FinCorp's efforts began to yield measurable results. Employee satisfaction grew, and the number of complaints regarding discrimination and bias dropped dramatically. More importantly, there was a sense of shared purpose within the company. The changes weren't just top-down directives, they were embedded into the very culture of FinCorp. People were talking openly about their experiences, and there was an openness to feedback that had never existed before. Even the media, which had once criticized the bank for its handling of the incident, now highlighted the positive steps FinCorp was taking. Articles and interviews began to focus not on the mistake itself, but on the incredible transformation that had followed. The shift in public perception was palpable. What had once been a stain on the bank's reputation had now become a symbol of resilience and growth. One day, I received an invitation to visit FinCorp again. But this time, it wasn't about a problem to be solved. It was about celebrating progress. Richard Lawson and the senior leadership team wanted to recognize my contributions to their journey, and more importantly, to continue our work together. They understood now that this wasn't just about making amends. It was about creating a lasting partnership between business and social responsibility. At the event, Richard stood before the crowd and acknowledged the impact I had made, not only on FinCorp, but on the broader conversation about inclusion. Marcus, your courage to not only face this issue head-on, but to turn it into an opportunity for change is an example of the leadership we all need. Thank you for holding us accountable and for showing us that real change requires us to look inward as much as it does outward. I accepted the recognition with humility. I didn't do this alone, I said. None of us can change the world by ourselves. It's through collaboration, through the hard work of individuals willing to grow and change, that we can make a real difference. This isn't just about me or FinCorp, it's about all of us. Every one of us has a part to play in making the world a more inclusive place. As the months passed, the changes within FinCorp Bank were undeniable. The commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion became more than just corporate policy. It became a part of the bank's identity. Vanessa, who had once been an embodiment of the biases that still haunted the industry, was now a key figure in the training programs. She led workshops, participated in discussions, and shared her own transformative journey with others who, like her, needed to confront their own biases. Her honesty and vulnerability made her a powerful voice for change, and she inspired others to do the same. At the same time, I continued to expand my efforts through the foundation. Our mentorship programs were thriving, providing young people from underserved communities the tools and opportunities they needed to succeed. These programs weren't just about scholarships or access to education. They were about giving these individuals a voice, a chance to be seen for who they truly were, beyond their circumstances. I spent more time speaking with young entrepreneurs, helping them understand the value of authenticity and the power of giving back. I'd learned from my own experiences that wealth and success weren't just about the numbers in a bank account. They were about the impact you could have on the world, the legacy you could leave behind. Despite all the progress, I couldn't help but feel that there was still so much work to be done. The issues of inequality and prejudice were so deeply ingrained in society and business that they couldn't be solved overnight. But what had been accomplished so far, what Vanessa, FinCorp, and I had managed to do together, proved that change was possible. And that was the message I kept trying to spread. Then came the day that marked the final chapter of this journey, a moment that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I was invited to speak at an international conference on corporate responsibility. It was a big event, with leaders from all over the world gathering to discuss the future of business in a socially conscious world. As I took the stage, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The experience with Vanessa, with FinCorp, and the ripple effect that had spread from that one moment had shaped not just my career, but my purpose. Standing before a room full of industry leaders, I spoke passionately about the need for businesses to take responsibility, not just for their financial success, but for their role in shaping society. The world we live in is more connected than ever, I said. We cannot afford to ignore the problems around us. We cannot afford to turn a blind eye to inequality, discrimination, or injustice. It's up to all of us to lead by example, to make our industries, our communities, and our world a better place for everyone. As I finished, the applause was overwhelming. But the real reward wasn't the applause. It was knowing that the words I had spoken would resonate beyond the conference, inspiring others to take action. It was a reminder that every small step toward change mattered, no matter how daunting the journey seemed. Later that day, as I walked out of the conference center, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. It was simple, but it meant the world to me. Marcus, I just wanted to thank you for everything. You've shown me what real leadership looks like and how to take responsibility for my actions. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, and I'm even more excited about the work still ahead of us. Let's keep pushing for change. I smiled as I read her message. She had truly transformed, and so had the bank, but more importantly, so had I. We had all learned that real change didn't come from anger or revenge. It came from understanding, growth, and collaboration. We had learned to see each other not just for who we appeared to be, but for who we truly were. The journey was far from over. But as I reflected on everything we had achieved, I couldn't help but feel hopeful. Together, we had turned an act of prejudice into a movement for change. And that, in itself, was a victory. This story has been a journey of growth for me as well. When I first started, I never imagined how deeply the themes of judgment, redemption, and collaboration would resonate. It's a reminder that no matter how deeply rooted our biases may be, there's always room for growth and change. It's not just about individual transformation, it's about collective action. And in a world where so much feels divided, I believe that change starts with each of us.